This episode is brought to you by Paintsville Tourism. Visit paintsvilletourism.com. Paintsville is located in the heart of the Country Music Highway on US 23 in eastern Kentucky. Come see why Paintsville is eastern Kentucky's city of note. Visit paintsvilletourism.com. This episode is brought to you by the Highway Artist Management Agency. We take pride in helping artists achieve their full potential. Visit us at highwaymgt.com. That's highwaymgt.com. If you're in the market for a new or pre-owned vehicle, try Pops Chevrolet. Pops Chevrolet will give you the best price guaranteed. Visit popschevy.com. P-O-P-S Chevy.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shed podcast. If you're wondering what type of podcast this is, let me share a few things before we start. My name is Wade Smith. I have the honor of working on a film documenting the extraordinary life of legendary music producer Harold Shedd. Harold basically changed country music in the 80s and 90s. He has produced some of the biggest albums in country music. With Alabama alone, he produced 21 consecutive number one hits, a record that'll never be broken. And he has worked with icons such as Mel Tillis and Reba McEntire. He also signed acts such as Billy Ray Cyrus, Toby Keith, Shania Twain, KT Oslin, the Kentucky Headhunters, just to name a few. He built the Music Mill studio from scratch, and then he ran Mercury Records in Nashville and turned it around into a powerhouse, and he also founded Polydor Nashville. To say Harold has had an amazing career in life is an understatement. Alright, so about this podcast. While researching for the film, I've been around Harold the last several years, listening to him and his friends and colleagues share stories about music, radio, Nashville, and life. These stories are the best. They are very informational. They're very entertaining. These stories are built for podcast. For the next several episodes, we will sit down with Russ Zavitson, who ran the Music Mill, Brian Rawlings, he ran Disney's publishing, Jason Morris, music publisher, Chuck Bedwell, also a music publisher, along with myself and the legend Harold Shedd. These guys have worked together or with each other for decades in the music business. Nashville's legends of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the puppet masters behind the scenes, working the deals, listening to the songs, recording the tracks, so folks like me at home in Red Bush, Kentucky, can turn the radio on and hear Alabama sing Roll On. These guys are the pioneers that changed the country music industry. They took a genre of music stereotyped as hillbilly or backwoods, performed with small audiences in bars and honky-tonks, to monumental heights with artists selling millions of records and selling out super stadiums in minutes. They made country music artists household names worldwide. We hope you enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it. This is Behind the Shed.
But it was when you were working at BMG and guy came to see you. We were all the lowest guys on the totem pole, so we got all the guys that just walked in off the street. And so you got some guy came in, played him a few songs.
Yeah.
Chuck passed on all of them, and then the guy stood up and said, "Young man, I've been a publisher for 25 years." Chuck looked at me and said, "Oh, you're a publisher, thank God." Said, "Let me just tell you, publisher to publisher, you need to get you some writers."
Yeah, he wasn't real happy about
Yeah. He needs to get you some writers.
We did a song
I think he came to see Russ.
Yeah, y'all signed him.
Yeah.
That's what's crazy.
Yeah, Russ didn't like his song and he pulled a gun on him.
Shit, that really happened.
Oh, I remember that story. Wow.
Yeah.
What was it?
Tony Hazelden.
And we signed him.
You signed him and turned out okay.
That gun will intimidate. Yeah, we need to get started before we start telling stories.
Okay.
No, you can go.
Yeah, it's being recorded.
Oh, is it? Okay.
One of the things about podcasting environments, other than the fact that my chair is whistling by rubbing against that mic stand, but is that they always start when you don't think they are.
Oh,
so that you'll tell that story.
Right. It's been going on for a while.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Hard to tell how much is going to have to be clipped off the.
Well, no,
guy.
But if we're going to tell that story, then a guy came in and at the Music Mill, you came up the stairs and came back, and there was only one way out, back down the hallway and down the stairs.
27 stairs.
And guy claimed that he'd been sent over by Columbia Records to see me, and I just assumed it was true. I didn't check it.
Right.
Guy came in, sat down, gave me a tape, and I put it in. And terrible track with no singing. I turned it down. I said, well, I can't tell you anything about your song. There's no lyrics here. He goes, listen to it. And I said, well, he's like, listen to it. So I turned it up. And I said, yeah, that's a nice track. Well, it's good to see you. And he said, well, if anybody tries to steal my songs, he said, I'm going to protect them with this 45 right. And he pulled out a gun. Later on, people said, what did he look like? And I said, I don't know, but that gun was about this long. Yeah. And all I could think of the whole time was, if I jumped up out of off my desk and jumped through the back door and ran around the office behind him, how many times could he shoot me before I got down the stairs? I think if he got me in the leg, I could make it down the stairs. Oh. I love the music business.
Yeah.
Ain't it great?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny.
I've been at it long enough where actually having a gun at a meeting wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like early 80s.
Yeah.
Everybody had a gun.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was crazy though is like back in the day, you think about it with today, that we used to, when I worked for Bob Montgomery, like from 9 o'clock till 3 o'clock every day, every half an hour, I had an appointment with an unknown mother.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And he was one of the few that still did it at that point.
Yep.
Tree had shut it down. They wouldn't take outside material. A lot of people just shut it down. Yeah. But man, some of those stories.
Yeah.
They're funny. It's one of the things about Music Row, which is why we're all here, because we were on Music Row at the same time, is that it was, in fact, people walking up and down with guitar cases, which was the scariest thing in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Was somebody somehow getting into your office with their guitar.
Oh, yeah, because you couldn't hit stop.
Because you can't pause,
You can't
right?
hit stop.
There's no eject button on a live performance.
And that how you kind of, you motion your hands a little bit. Okay, yeah, I got.
Okay,
And
okay.
no, wait, next verse. The next verse is great.
Yeah.
Keep playing.
Plus,
That's when you just get up and use
a
the
guitar case would hold a 12-gauge pump.
So you're living on the edge.
Hey, you know what? I sent you guys the other day, speaking of which, because I want to get to this pretty quick too if we can. I sent you guys the original recording of 16th Avenue, the Tom
Yes.
Schuyler
Yeah,
song,
yeah.
and then the new version,
Yeah.
how it was and how it is. And I think it's interesting. There's a line in that song about, because they, what was the line about that they knew someone who knew someone who
Yeah,
owned
yeah.
a studio,
Who owned a
and that's how we
studio.
all got into this. Well, how we all know each other, because it was sort of like that.
It was. It
Yep.
was funny. So
16th
I came
Avenue.
here.
Yeah, but how we all knew each other. The
Yeah,
same
how
kind of
we all
story,
ended
yeah.
up knowing Harold.
Somebody who knew somebody
a
who
friend
knew
that knew
somebody.
a friend.
That's
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's how we all got there.
Exactly.
It kind of started. Brian and I met each other in college.
Yep.
And
And I got to tell you,
the few days.
that's threading a needle.
Yeah, because the few days I actually went, I was enrolled, but
Yeah.
I hadn't been there much.
Yeah.
But Brian and I got together, and then I was working at House of Gold at the time,
Right.
and so that was kind of like Brian's little end. He'd hang with me, and he was my end because he could play and sing, and I never was a didn't play, sing, write, wrote a few songs, but so that was and then plus we were having a freaking ball hanging out.
Yeah, we had a really good time.
But then we met Russ, because Russ was on Muscle Shoals at the time with Desert Rose Music, and he was looking for someone to throw songs around for him, help him, right, basically in Nashville, and that's basically how the three of us got together. And then during that time,
And you guys needed some money, so I gave you a bunch of money, $100.
But we have to remember, before that
a bunch
happened,
of money.
you have to listen. Everything in our relationship, just so we all know how we got here, is based on when Chuck got fired.
Y'all got
So,
and that happened a couple of times.
Well, more than a couple, but go ahead, yeah.
So when Chuck got fired from House of Gold, there was a little bit of a gap period there, and then he ended up at Harold's place working for Harold. Now there's a gap which we'll fill in with many conversations,
Yeah.
but he ended up working for Harold, who was, to us, an untouchable creature of up in this stellar place where we didn't meet people like that.
Well, you know what's funny about that is we all really looked at that when he was in the old place, right?
Yes.
So before the mill, because none of us really knew Harold.
Right.
Yeah.
We didn't realize he was just us in an older form, with a lot of talent.
You saying he's old?
Well,
He's my oldest friend.
he is my old
Kids
friend.
in old men clothes.
Well, he was though. I mean, Harold
I
was.
stole that line.
Yeah,
There you go. Harold was the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
I mean, to
But
me,
you
he
never really
was.
saw it. I'd
He
take-
was the guy that had
You
the
heard about
hottest
him.
act in the world and doing all this
I'd
stuff.
take when I took Love in the First Degree over there on a cassette. I'll never forget from House of Gold. I left it with Cotton because that was that simple. When you walked in,
Yep.
if somebody was in the studio, if there was music, you knew enough. And if you couldn't get past the secretary, now luckily I got to know a lot of the
A lot of
secretaries.
secretaries.
A lot of the first, if you couldn't get back to that first row of defense,
I used to
you
always
were
hand him
gone.
a towel in
It
the
didn't
morning.
matter.
Yeah, that was Carolyn.
Oh God, Carolyn.
Yep.
Her laugh.
Yeah.
You remember her
Yeah,
laugh?
shit howdy.
Oh, shit, howdy.
So anyway, so you got a cassette to Cotton, who was Harold's engineer.
So Harold's engineer, and Harold's engineer, and then all of a sudden, then it goes through, and nobody gets a song cut by themselves.
No.
But everybody starts claiming it.
Everybody.
All right, but that record was one of those really wasn't it? Harold was like a surprise huge hit, "Love in the First Degree."
Oh, yeah.
because it was on the album, but I don't think it was even stickered back then. Remember, sticker the singles.
Yes.
Was it stickered?
It
even?
was.
It was. Okay.
It was,
But
yeah.
that record went pop, didn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the. Well, it was one of the first records that we enhanced with
Put strings on?
yeah, we didn't have Pro Tools. It wasn't that enhanced, but we didn't have Pro Tools. But we did have what they call a harmonizer. So
The old
you could, while you couldn't tune it, we had 3 different kinds of echo. We had 2 plates, a live chamber, and then we had the old Ampex 601 that looked like a piece of Samsonite luggage. You remember that? So you could do echo and delay tricks with that. So we used that on Love in the First Degree to get the sound that we got. So
was that the early reverb?
that was the early reverb.
Well, and that's so distinct though on the
And-
end of that.
Yeah.
And you
that-
could actually, with the harmonizer, you could trick the echo and make it sound like it was something it was not.
Yeah.
And you can hear that through it like that, and throw away the key. That part right in there. Think about that,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So you're saying it was
Baby, you
could
left
make
me
Teddy sound
defenseless.
good.
Yeah.
You could make Teddy sound good in 1981.
But so then, like after
Stepping out from the garbage.
But the really cool thing about all of that era was you didn't have all the perks, but you did have the ability to make a singer do it until he got it right, So
Yeah.
that
It might
was
take all day.
that was a good part of. Yeah, sometimes you couldn't do that in 3 hours.
Right,
right.
It took 5 or 6 hours sometimes. But Randy Owen, for instance, never came back once he left the tracking session.
He said, I'm done.
We did tracks until he got his vocal the way that he wanted it, and then we built the record around all of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was a good part of it.
Yeah. Man, there's no doubt those records were great. The big thing to me in those days, though, was that when I first moved to Muscle Shoals and was coming back and forth to Nashville, a big country record would sell 150 albums. And then when you signed to Alabama and started making those records,
150,000 to be fair.
150,000.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And then when you signed to Alabama, all of a sudden you guys were selling like the Beatles. I mean, you were selling 5 million albums.
Well, that's
and that
true.
was
At that time, especially during that time, 200,000 was a big country
Right,
record,
yeah.
And Mahomes in Alabama in 5 months was gold.
Absolutely.
So it was
Wow.
And that was so
unheard of.
eye-opening, right?
And then the one that followed sold 4 million.
Yeah.
I mean, just right
so
away. Feels so right.
Yeah.
Had
so
love and Old Flame.
Yeah.
Feels so right. And
I can
But
remember.
all of a sudden, it was a different animal, though. All of a sudden, that you all were having these huge album sales in Nashville. All of a sudden, we talk about Nashville today. how country's so hot. But I mean, that's a different concept
Yeah,
in
that
those
was-
days, because in those days, all of a sudden, you were competing with the world, not
Right.
Nashville, Tennessee anymore with those records.
Well, those records were so good, but they're also different because it was a group. It wasn't that individual. Because I've got a theory, and I think Harold will agree with this, about what really hurt country music more than what people realize is when Keith Whitley died.
Yeah.
Because Keith Whitley was such an incredible vocal country.
He was the real deal.
He was the real deal,
Yeah.
and people would have patterned themselves after it. But instead, it turned into a bunch of hat singers, and there was that unique kind of new country guy. They're not saying.
Well, the
it never
early
happened
'80s,
again.
it was a little different. Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? It's just that unique thing. I mean, but Harold you always did unique. Like when KT Osland. Oh my
Yeah.
God. What you remember when we went and saw her at the little thing down there beside Tavern on the Row?
Yes.
Where was he? What was
The
he?
Row?
Tavern on the
Where Warner
Road.
Brothers is
Next
now.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was that cinder block building.
And we both in the song when she was those songs that she was singing, I was like, remember we were just like, oh my God.
Yeah. You listen. Well, even the original demo that the lady from CSAC, what was her name? Diane Petty.
Petty.
Oh, yeah.
Diane Petty brought her to town originally, and then we went to her showcase, and while there were several label heads represented, no one seemed to really be into her because they didn't, I guess, really
She wasn't
get the music. The fact that she was older and everything entered into their decisions, and to me, once I heard all those songs like you're talking about, it didn't matter how old she was or if she was male or female.
We can make a great
You
record.
can't turn that down.
And what was crazy too with her was when you got to know her and her personality really came out.
Oh, yeah.
She was
Well, she was a
she was
star.
an icon. She was
Yeah,
like
she
that
was
women-
witty.
She
And
was so powerful for women. The 80s ladies
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
was, I mean, women that went crazy
Yeah,
and
yeah.
bought that record. you
Yep.
know?
Yeah, Russ, you if you remember, '80s Ladies was Song of the Year, Record of the Year, Album of the Year.
That's huge.
She was Female Vocalist of the Year,
Oh, it was a sweet.
and wrote and sang the song. So that had not been done in like 20-something
No.
years.
But she was on CSAC in the 80s, so she only made $37.
That's right.
Hey, you know what? As a matter of fact, I was still down in Muscle Shoals, and Larry Shell called me, who's all our good
yeah.
friend too, that worked with Harold forever and
Rev.
ever.
The Rev.
And Larry called me and said, and called me to come up and meet with you and him about coming to work in the beginning of in the middle of 1986.
Yep, you just fired
Around that time.
Once
That's
again.
absolutely right, as a matter of
me.
fact.
You just fired me.
And I came
He didn't
up,
want to, but he
and I
had to
met-
fire Chuck.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
now
I
go
came up,
ahead.
I think it was in March of '86, and I came up and we met, and I barely knew Harold at the time, but we met that first time. And Larry said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Man, I don't know. I feel like I'll just be country if I can. I want to be able to do all these different things, you know." And so right around the time y'all signed KT, I'd come back up later that year, and y'all played me those first sides you'd done on KT. And I told Larry, I said, "Man, that is really, really cool. I don't even think that's country. I think that's kind of a pop record." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Man, you sure you don't want to come up here?" And I said, "Let me think about it again." And that was a big part of my decision to come up because it was a different kind of thing. And I went, "Man, they may have something going." And it was, of course, it continued after that. Of course, the ride I took with you after that. But, you know, that was something that made me open my eyes up and go,
Well,
"Oh
you
my
knew a guy
God."
that knew a guy.
Yeah,
Right.
I knew a guy who knew a guy. Started with him. I knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy.
Who knew a guy who knew a guy.
Yeah.
Who owned,
Yeah.
a studio.
A studio, who owned a studio.
one of
I
the
walked in close quarters. That's how I got to know all y'all.
Yeah.
But Harold, I think that's the one thing that is so classic about your career as a producer is nothing is the same. There's no two artists that you ever did
sound alike.
that like, oh well, that sounds like the record he did on so and so, or that sounds this sound. They, you know,
Absolutely.
I mean,
well,
Actually, no two
you know,
records sound the same. I
course.
mean, there's
Yeah.
not-
That's what I'm saying. And back then it was a little bit different too, because you had to tell a story. 1 through 5 on one side of the album. You couldn't, you evil bitch, in the first song, and then how much I love you on cut 2.
Right.
Remember that whole thing of placing songs on the album?
order?
A side and B side. That was a huge
difference.
deal.
Yeah.
Joe Galante used to let me help with that, because he said, man, you know how to kind of, I learned it from Harold. But
Well, you guys, were so instrumental, not just in the music, but the attitude and everything. I don't know how we were able to do the first part of it, and that is to assemble a group of people that were as good as we had, and then all you guys came along, and then the KT was really the first big act we signed after Alabama. Alabama was so huge. I'm sorry, Mel Tillis came along, and we worked with Mel and then KT. But when we showcased KT, she had been recording and singing commercials in New York, and that's where she was.
I'm trying to remember
when
her
we
flying
met.
back and forth during the...
Yeah, she was doing hemorrhoid commercials, so she wanted to get into country music. And I said,
Anything's better than that.
I said, we got a lot of those.
Yeah.
But anyway, so she did misrepresent the age, slightly, but she was, I thought, 42, and she was really 48. But the record, to go back, Russ, to what you were saying earlier, my deal with KT was she did not want to give up the songs until she tried to do her thing. And I felt like that she deserved that. And so my deal with KT was, we'll go in and we'll demo these songs. And if we can get anyone interested in the project, then we'll do that. If not, then she agreed to let me take the songs and do what I wanted to do with them, And I had a place for them at the time because I had been in talks with Rick Blackburn at CBS. And they were looking for a new direction for Janie Fricke at that time. And I thought, when I heard these, that's who I thought of, actually, in the beginning, because, it was a whole career laying there.
Right.
10, 20 of the best songs I'd ever heard, or that anyone had ever heard. So, and I called David Briggs and Larry London and Mike Brignadella.
Greatest players in town.
Wow. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so we all went in to do these demos, and about the second song, Larry London came up and said, "Harold, we're not doing demos, don't you?" And I said, "They do sound like records, And so that's how good it was. Nothing I was doing. I just happened to bring KT, but the guys knew what we were doing,
Right.
And that was so
Larry London.
good at the time. Yeah, he was the best at the time.
Do you remember when he said the metronome was off? And you guys stopped the studio and they had a guy come in and check the metronome, and it was off.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That's a drummer.
That's genius right there.
He also told another artist we were working with one time, it was a lady, she said, the beat is ma'am, I am the beat. And he was. He was the beat.
Yeah, you know what I think you just said it wasn't anything I was doing a minute ago. And it's interesting to me because I think the whole legacy here to me with you, and I feel like it's part of our legacy coming up under you, is that those artists that you chose always stuck out. There were always artists coming to town that had 5 labels chasing, trying to sign them. And every artist since I've known you, even before I knew you, that you signed, everybody said, and I got to experience it a lot during the years I worked with you, nobody wanted but you. And I'll never forget people going, every time you'd sign one, and I can go through the list in a minute, I'd have people that I got to know in town calling saying, man, I hear Harold signed so-and-so. I said, he's lost his freaking mind this time. And then 40 million records later.
Right, exactly.
And then the next time you do it, and they'd call and go,
He's lost
it this time. And finally, my joke always was, when he finally left A&M Polydor at the end of that run with Polygram, the artist he was trying to sign, he was dealing with, we laughed about when he was leaving, was the world champion turkey caller. And I remember Tony Hazelin, who wrote for us, looked at me and said,
I'm sorry we missed that
I
one.
know. I think the world is probably sad. It probably would have been a big hit record. But again, the point is about this whole thing is as I look out at the younger population today and what they're doing, and I know as an old guy, it's easy to say, well, everything seems so samey, but there's been eras in our career where we all felt the same way, where it all sounds samey. You never did that, and I think that's probably got a lot to do with the success we've all had here, because we came up under that and we were trying to do different things because that's what you did. And we went, yeah, that's exciting. Yeah. Going in and making a record on Bob, it's made 3 of them already and sounds like the Bob before him, never was exciting. All those acts you signed, from after KT, you went to Mercury, and there was a fledgling joke label in town when they hired you to run that label.
Right. It
was just a joke. It was the place where artists went to die, they said, back in those days. And you came along.
Oh, yeah, Tom T. Hall was on that one.
That's right, yeah. You came along and signed
50 with an acre.
the Kentucky Headhunters, which sounded, I'll never forget the day you came in and played me that record, when you signed that record. And we're sitting in my office and you played it, and I said, damn, that sounds like ZZ Top with country lyrics. And I'm going, man, I turned it down. I said, you think you can get that on the radio? He said, do you like it? And I said, yeah, I love it. Listen to the next one. We listened to the whole record. Would you think you get that on the radio? I don't care. Just tell me if you love it. And I said, yeah. I said, okay, I'll see you later. And the next thing I know, you guys are on TV at the CMA Awards getting the album of the year and selling 50 billion records, And everybody's going, he's lost his mind. Yeah. Well, hell, I want to go crazy with him.
I want to go crazy too.
Yeah.
Well, I always said that people, I think, in music forget that it's not about having a music producer. A real producer is who knows who to put who with. Whether it comes from the staff that you've got that's working for you, whether it comes through how you process this, who's the leader.
Trust the gut.
Who do you hire as the the pickers. That's a real producer. I don't think it's always necessarily where you're Burt Bacharach in the studio behind the board. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Having to make some magic.
Build the machine.
Your magic always was you had the right people there. You knew how to pick the right. That was my way of you, Harold. Always look at the greatest producer because of everything that was involved in it, not just. Y'all shut up, I'm doing it my way. We know there's a lot of those producers out there.
Yeah, but even you're right, picking the right people, including the act. It's always interesting to me. You went to go to a showcase and you see the Headhunters. Tell me that story. Why would you go? Nothing sounded like that. Nope. Nothing sounded like that on country radio. What led you to do?
That was an interesting evening because I went to hear someone else. I didn't know the Headhunters would be there, Right. I had not even heard of the Headhunters at that time. But so the act that I went to see, he didn't do it for me. So about that time, I think Larry Shell was with me.
Mm-hmm. That would make sense.
And as I recall, this is the way I recall it. And the Headhunters came through the front door, and I said, Larry, I want to hear this band. He said, you do? Why do you want to hear them? And I said, Well, first of all, they're the ugliest band I've
Ever seen?
They got to sound better than they look, right?
It was a look, yeah. But anyway, and I have to tell you, even Larry's, he was such a great guy and such a talent. All you guys were as varied as the stuff we did. It was, we never did the same thing twice. But anyway, so the Heads came in, and the way I operated was always from my gut, if you'll have it,
Trust the gut.
And they came in and they got on stage and they opened their show with a cover song, Waylon's Only Daddy That'll Walk the Line, and segued right into Walk Softly. And when they got to the chorus, I turned to Larry, I says, I'm going to sign this band. And it was like that, and that's the way it happened.
That's so cool.
And so we stayed, and as it turned out, they had 8 sides already cut on an album, and they called it Picking on Nashville. Perfect title for it, And so I bought the album for $25,000 and gave them $20,000 more to do 2 more sides. And then they got a little advance for the band. And so we released the record, and it just, it was so successful. It sold 3 million in no time. And then Dumas Walker came along after that.
That was such a huge record.
It was, well, they became Group of the Year that year.
They won all those awards
on a debut album.
But consider when you say 3 million back then. Let's talk about today for all the kids listening.
I know.
3 million hard sales back then. The income, even. I mean, and I feel sorry for these kids today.
Right. There used to be a formula.
Versus streaming.
Yeah.
Now
the artist grossed $30 million when you sold $3 million. It was like $30 million, right?
And back then too, you remember if you were a co-writer, one of the songs on that album, you'd make about 30-40 grand. That could get you through the year.
That wasn't even a single.
And that just to be on the album.
Just to be on
and
the
if you could get 2 or 3 of those a year, I don't know if that made a lot of mediocre writers stick around longer, or
it did some of that.
Made the other ones fall off. But
it was a healthy environment, though.
For those of you that don't know, we're now editing for a moment the names of the mediocre songwriters that stayed around and wrote album cuts, just like Lathan Hudson. But
oh God! Hey, you know what? Speaking of that, hey, let's shift for a second. So because we'll come back to this stuff. But Harold, in those days, you were out finding talent and stuff, and that was a big part of your gig. That wasn't the only part of your gig as a label guy and as a producer. But this will involve us some more here too, because in those days, we actually had publishers that went out and pitched songs.
Absolutely.
And the kids there are going to say, well, what is that exactly?
What does it mean?
You spent a lot of your time meeting with idiots like us running around playing songs, and that was a big part of it too, listening to a lot of bad songs and us trying to get songs recorded. All of us in those days. That doesn't happen anymore, so much.
I remember the first time I pitched songs to Harold, and I was like, I made a phone call, got an answer, and he said, sure. I was like, what? I'm going to meet with Harold.
Tell us about the first time you played a song for Harold. You remember?
Oh, gosh. I think he was at Mercury. Actually, I don't think I can tell that story.
We can edit shit.
Well, that was part of our philosophy, really.
You took meetings, though.
We met with writers who wanted to play songs.
No germs.
And, well, there were every now and then...
It gets you a germ.
It gets germy, but you never know. So you just do it, and
That'll be in the show notes.
It was. Then shortly after that, Sammy Kershaw came to town.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
that was a Mercury act, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so we recorded Cadillac Style.
Yeah, that was a great record.
And Don't Go Near the Water.
Near the Water.
And it just
took off.
It took off. Cadillac became a sponsor and
Yeah.
underwrote the touring and all of that.
That was a couple million albums.
Delivered a new Cadillac to his driveway,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Boy, what a deal.
Yeah, back in those days before Harold went to the label, when it was still at the mill. I mean, Harold has no idea how much it helped me in how I was looked at
Absolutely.
because Harold would, if somebody did get a little gurmy, they'd say, well, you know what, play it for Chuck, and if he likes it,
He'll play it for Harold.
he'll play it for Harold. So
That's
remember I
right.
became the kid with the tapes with Randy and them, right? When
Yeah.
they Alabama, that's
Where's the
what
kid with
Randy
the
called
tapes?
me. Where's the kid with the tapes? Because we'd send about 35 to 40 songs a week. Remember that, out to them on the road?
Yes.
And I had to put them on separate cassettes because we didn't want to all get in the same
God
bus
forbid.
God forbid.
Yeah.
and listen to it on the road. But that's just.
Hey,
Well, we were at a stage where we got the choice, you know.
Yeah.
If someone had a new song
It came to
that
the
one
mill.
of their any publisher, you know,
Sure.
and all the publishers.
It was all.
they all did.
Yeah.
All.
I mean,
all.
they came out of the studio.
and we would listen. So, long story short, we had about 60 at the end of all of this. We had 61 or 2 number one songs
Jeez,
that had been pitched
from outside.
to our artists that we didn't record for whatever reason. We didn't think it was right for the project or whatever, but they became number one hits for other artists. So that, in a sense, tells you how strong we were as a group at that time,
Yep.
because we got the best of everything.
Well,
you
it
know?
was so strong that
And-
someone would say, well, yeah, I played that for Alabama and they didn't cut it. Well, that wouldn't have been a hit for Alabama.
No,
it was a great
no, it was
song.
it was not
Well, you know
for
what I mean?
them,
Yeah.
right?
And then
or
you-
Sammy,
and you
or
would do that.
KT, or
You-
Mel,
you'd stand up
or
to, you know-
Glen Campbell, or
Yeah.
so we had. About that time, Glenn came on the scene,
Yeah.
so we cut a lot of outside songs. Glenn had only been doing mostly Jimmy Webb songs,
Right.
and not to take anything from Jimmy Webb, he was one of the greatest
Yeah.
writers
Yeah.
ever.
Oh, my gosh.
And-
I kinda
Wichita
stick with that,
lineman.
too.
Boy, you know,
Wichita
so-
lineman. If you catch
but
me alone in
he
the
wanted
truck.
to do some different things, so we did, and we also had some hits, and a number one song, and a couple of top fives.
You remember the call home scenario?
Call Home,
That
yes.
story was fun.
That Mike Reed, because remember Brian was working
Oh,
for
what a great song.
That was the same. Because what
Millsap,
you were
yeah.
talking about, like, so when I was working at Millsaps and Mike Reed wrote for us.
I love Call Home.
I mean, it's just brilliant, right? And
Yeah.
but he hadn't done a demo of it yet. He had a little work tape, and so I told Chuck, I said, I got a real good one. We got to play it for Harold, and Harold trusted us, so we just went in Studio A, and the
Mike.
songwriter Mike came over. And Mike, if you haven't heard him, look him up.
He's
But
kinda good.
as a singer-songwriter. He's a really good singer too, and a great piano player.
Oh,
so,
man,
So
yeah.
he
Hell of a
came
football
over to
player.
the
Yeah,
Not
studio.
bad. I was going to say, not a bad
Right?
football player.
Not a bad football player either. But he would. He came over to the studio. Chuck set up the appointment, and we went in there and with Mike. And this had never happened to me at that time. I was 23 years old or something, you know. And we go in, and Mike sits at the piano. And it was the big studio. That's A on
Yep.
the right, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he went in the big studio at the Music Mill. Harold listened to the song, and it's a really sweet, beautiful song.
Oh, it's a fabulous song.
And so Mike played it all the way through, and he's got this big, beautiful baritone voice, and he sang it and all that kind of stuff. Harold, never being one to holler and shout much, said, I'll never forget it. He says, well, I don't think... he said, I don't know what else you could want out of a song.
Because it had
that was, I'm like, yes. You know, and
Call Home.
go home, and they went in and cut that thing.
That,
man,
that says it all.
Yeah,
I can
it
tell
was
you in my
brilliant.
whole
And
time.
while that was going on, Jim Weatherly and Keith Stegall were
yeah.
downstairs
Yeah.
writing A Lady Like You,
A Lady Like
which
You,
was
that's right.
the number one song off of that album.
that
record,
It was
that's
the
right.
first number one off of
Wow.
it.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
then J.D. Souther, when
JD.
When he and Linda Ronstadt were together, I guess for a period of time.
Sure.
And when that came unglued, he wrote this song for her called Faithless Love.
Yep.
And we cut that, and that was the next big hit off of that album.
That's my favorite record you made on him personally. That's my personal
That's my
It's a
favorite
brilliant
one.
one. It's a brilliant
Well, I
record.
did like the Paul Kennerly song, "I'll Be Faithful to You." It was
It's just
really
a beautiful
good.
album. Well,
Yeah, it was a.
and Glenn was at sort of peak Glenn
Oh
singing
man,
wise.
he was
voice
at his
great.
best. Glenn, I recorded Glenn laying on the couch. He was such a great person. We had such a good time in the studio.
He was such a real guy.
He was.
I remember
he was
crying behind the board because the night he sang the vocal on Call Home, he had Harold shut everything down. You remember that,
Yeah.
Harold? All the lights off. Had one spotlight over him on his knees. On his knees.
Yeah. That might have been when we did Call Home.
That's what I'm saying. Call
Yeah, it
Home.
was.
Yeah.
And boy, it was just it was.
Yeah.
I've been through some pretty cool experiences in the studio.
Sure.
That hit me like.
Yeah, that's the
nothing.
first time I ever heard the word germ.
Yeah.
Was from Glenn?
Yeah, I says, what we're going to do today? He says, we're going to go germ somebody. And I said, we're going to do what?
You want to do what?
We're going to go germ. So he gave me a cap. It's got germ.
I remember that. You know what? Hey, you know what? I'm thinking of my only Glen Campbell story. I got to know him a little bit when you were making that record on Polygram with him, the last one, and he cut a song of Tony Hazel's we published. Sam Muncie, and he wrote it called "We Will." Remember that?
We will.
And it
Yes.
wasn't even a hit. It was just on the album. And of course, Glenn got dementia and everything. But the interesting thing about him, and I told you this story. I was coming back from California, and I was in Arizona, and I ran into him at the airport. I hadn't seen him in 10 years, and I didn't really even know him that well. And I walked up to him. I said, "Glenn, if you remember," he goes, "Sure I do." He said he started singing "We Will" to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
He
just
was
a
sharp.
song on
He
an
could-
album. I'm going, how do you remember that?
He was amazing.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
I have to tell you,
He told me, he says,
I was going to say, not a bad guitar player.
Yeah, he said, I get all my funny stuff from Roger Miller.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
That was the king of comedy.
We were working on a Roger Miller project
Oh, God.
at the same time.
You know,
So it was all meant to be like that.
Yeah.
Roger,
It
don't
was just-
keep your pills in the same pocket as your change.
Yeah, that's it.
Or him walking in the control room.
I
Is it
got up
cold
and took 35 cents.
Is it cold in here? Or is it my
It
career?
was in my career.
Yeah,
He was brilliant.
yeah, he
Oh,
was.
God. Before we finish on Glen Campbell,
Yeah.
I was at the Malibu Country Club. This is in the either early 2000s or late 90s. I was playing golf with Russ Kunkel, the drummer.
Oh, yeah, Russ.
And I was playing golf with the guy that played Sergeant Stryker in Airplane, Robert.
Oh yeah.
Robert Hayes.
Yeah.
And the three of us were out there getting ready to play golf. And Glenn, who was pretty much always there, but he was in the clubhouse. And I went over there, and it was the first time I'd seen him there. And I went up to him and I said, same thing, right? You probably don't remember me, but I was lucky enough to pitch you guys Call Home. And so he stood there in the pro shop at
And
the
sang.
Malibu Country Club and sang the whole song all the way through.
Wow.
And I was like, that's so sweet and all that kind of stuff. And my buddy Russ is kind of tugging at me a little bit. It's like, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. And so finally I'm like, well, it's so great to meet you and talk to you and visit. It wasn't the first time we'd met, but we had a long, chill chat. And then I got out of there and I said, what was that about? And he says, I was afraid he was going to want to play golf with us. And I'm thinking, well, I think it'd be great to play golf with Glen Campbell. He says, well, you've obviously never played golf with Glen Campbell. It's a 4-hour a cappella concert.
Yeah.
He said, oh, yeah. I said, all right, that makes sense.
Funny.
And the funny thing, so I tell you another one on Glenn before we leave him. During what we call the Bedwell period at the Music Mill, Chuck would receive like 2,000 packages a week from people sending songs
Yeah.
to you guys, right? And amongst those packages were our backstage passes to the June Jam.
That's right.
So we go to Alabama and we get down there. We've got no backstage passes to the June Jam, and for God's sake, I'm with Chuck. You know, I mean, it's like surely we can get into Alabama's personal concert.
This is a funny story right here.
So we go to this. I mean, obviously, what's the name of the city it's in?
Fort Payne.
Fort Payne,
So we're out in the boondocks of Fort Payne.
We got a hotel room.
Finest hotel in Fort Payne.
Which is the doors face outside.
Yeah, and the doors face outside, and I believe it was before Super 8 was a thing, but they later bought it.
6.
Yeah. So we're there, and we got no way to get in this concert, you know, but we sit there and Chuck's like, oh, there's Glenn. So we go in, Glenn and his brother's with him, right? And they're in this horrible hotel. It's got to be the worst hotel room Glen Campbell had stayed in
next to us.
since like 1972, right? And so we're in his hotel. Glenn's putting, right? He's got a couple of golf balls and he's putting on the carpet,
Probably singing
and
too,
shooting the
right?
shit with Chuck, and we're all catching and singing, always singing, and. So we're like, we don't know how to get in, you know. And so a helicopter came to get Glenn.
And Glenn knocks on doors. Come on. Now here's the funny part of this. Okay?
That almost never happens in my house.
So we get on the helicopter. He flies us in, and as we're getting off the helicopter, the guy that comes up, and, as you're walking down, Glenn goes, "Hey, those are my buddies. Give them a couple passes, And they hand us a pass and write our name on it. And when we flipped it over, it said Music Mill. It was our damn passes. I'll never forget that. Because
well, to be fair, those were our replacement passes.
Yes.
The original passes were found 2 weeks later in that big stack of bins of songs in the bin. He called me one day at home and he's like, I found their passes.
I found the passes, bro.
Yeah, they're in between. And speaking of passes, they're in between a bunch of shit I just passed on. That was fun, though.
But to go back, we also recorded a couple of Carl Jackson songs that were really good. Letter to Home.
Oh my God.
Well,
Carl and Glenn's connection was so, they'd worked together since Carl was like 19 when he started playing banjo. Early on. You go back and YouTube some of the old Carl Jackson, Glen Campbell, like the dueling banjos thing. They do that, and people that don't know Carl Jackson's picking, because that guy's just an incredible vocalist, writer. I mean, just true entertainer, Carl Jackson.
But he said, I steal all my good stuff from Roger. And I'll tell you this about Roger. Every morning he came into the studio, it was like a concert again. Except it was funny, Everything you ask him a question, and whatever he answered would be funny.
He never said anything that wasn't funny.
Yeah, and so I made it a point. I always said, "How you feel today, Roger?" And one day he said, "I'm riding the crest of a slump." and so you got to think about that. And then we got into a conversation one day. Not to dwell on Roger, but he was such a great artist and so talented. Hey, Big River, and some of the stuff that we did has been recorded by major artists. Last Word in Lonesome is Me.
Did you do Husbands and Wives?
Yeah. And River in the Rain from Big River. Alison Krauss and other people have cut it. It's such a great song. But anyway, so Roger, he came in and one morning, and we got into a conversation and about small towns. He said, I'm from a small town. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. I'm from Enid, somewhere in Oklahoma. Not Enid.
I think that's right.
I think it is Enid.
Then Eric.
Yeah.
I think Eric, Oklahoma,
Eric,
maybe.
Oklahoma, beautiful place.
Yeah. Yeah. I said, is that a big town? And he said, no, it's a small town. I said, well, did you live in town or did you live out? He said, I lived in the country. He said, in fact, I lived so far out, nobody lived behind me.
Wow.
He had a way with just.
He was just, he thought so differently than most people. And he was so intelligent.
Well, so quick.
Yeah.
And so he was so educated, you know.
If you think about just the structure of like Husbands and Wives, just the structure of that song.
Yes.
It is just, it's mind-bending how brilliant it is.
We went to lunch one day with him because my dad knew him from being a DJ.
It's my belief. Pride is the chief cause.
Yeah.
And the decline of Husbands and Wives. I mean, brilliant.
Yeah, it's so good.
So we were at lunch with him, and I was with Johnny and Danny, me and my dad, right, and Roger Miller. So we're all sitting there, we're all laughing, having a good time, and they brought the check, and it sat there, you know, and all of a sudden he grabbed it and said, honey, I'll get this. They're suffering from shell-out faults. And everybody, it took about 3 seconds.
That's so good.
About 3 shell-out
Shell-out.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
yeah, I'll use that. I like that.
That's good. Shell out.
Oh, God, that's funny.
Well, he did one morning at breakfast. He and Grant Boatwright and Charlie Williams and I, before Charlie died.
Yeah.
And he died not long after that, but we were at breakfast, and it was. This will give you an idea of when it was. There was a movie out called Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah.
It was a big movie. And on the breakfast, on the table, they brought the coffee and the cream. And it said Kramer, and Roger picked up 2 of them and, Kramer versus Kramer. And he did about 15 minutes.
Kramer versus
Kramer, yeah.
That's funny.
But that's how he thought.
He was so quick.
It was so great. But, you know, we had so much fun back then doing something that we all loved to do.
Amen.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't wait to get to work in the
Every day.
morning.
We never want to go home.
We never
didn't
worked.
go home.
We
That's why I
didn't
slept.
work. We
It was plenty.
we had fun all day.
That's why I'd sleep in my
I was
office
going
a
to
lot.
say, Chuck didn't ever go home. He slept in his car.
They opened a bar on the main drag in Muscle Shoals.
Like the Red
called
Dog or something?
Bubba's Red Dog Saloon.
Actually, Sheffield, but go ahead.
In Sheffield, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and Chuck and I thought, well, you know, being visitors, we were
should-
tourists in Muscle Shoals area. We should visit
Celebrate
there
the moment.
and visit their new establishment and show some support for the growing tourism. And somehow in all that, I ended up at his house naked with one sock on, and Chuck was in the newspaper.
That's a true story. My ex-wife came in going to work the next morning and came in, woke me up and said, Brian's in there on the floor laying naked. And I'd been out late working in the studio while they were out enjoying the new wetness of Sheffield, Alabama.
Yeah, baby.
And I walked in and I looked and I saw him laying there on his stomach. And I walked back in and I said, he's not naked, he's got a sock on. And went back to bed. That's a famous
And
story.
she even done with it. So I was laying there face down with one sock on. That's 1983 or whatever it was.
There was a girl in our bathtub. That's a whole other story.
Which is a whole nother story that later involves Tony Hazelden, but he didn't touch her, just in case his wife would. Julia,
That's
he
right.
didn't.
Nope.
He had nothing to do with it. He just made fun of her.
She was just in the
But
bathroom.
so 1999, probably 98, I was backstage at Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles, which at the time was a big deal. And I think it was about a 12 to 15,000 seat place, and I was in the middle of trying to convince Bad Company that I should be able to buy their catalog and sign them. So I signed them all to a publishing deal. to make them like me better so I could buy their catalog, which didn't all work out, but I had a great time.
You were at Disney at the time.
But I was when I was running Disney's publishing.
And wait, one other thing, set this up. The one sock story had grown by this time.
The one sock story, Russ had told that story about me being naked face down in his living room to everyone he had ever met in my presence. And so I'm backstage one day, and it's before the show. I'm in the big dressing room with Bad Company. And they're all chatting it up and talking about this and handing around the set list and talking to some assistant to go do something. And we were all just sitting around drinking beer, having a good time backstage. And finally, Bucket Caldwell was playing rhythm guitar with him at the time. And Bucket looked at me and he said, "Hey, Bri, could you pop out for a minute?" I'm like, oh, God. So I walked outside and I sat down. There were 3 levels of backstage at Universal Amphitheater. There was the girls that got stickers on their pants. They got to come back and meet you afterwards. Then there was people that actually worked in the music business, and then there were the artists hung out, right? And so I was hanging out where the artists hung out.
You got bumped down?
Right, I just overstayed my welcome.
Just for a minute, you got bumped down?
I did. I got bumped down, right back where I belonged. And I was feeling pretty bad about it, So I sat there and sulked like a little child for about 3 minutes, and Bucket stuck his head in and says, "Okay, Bri, come on back." So I go back in the dressing room, and that big dressing room at the Universal Amphitheater had a huge grand piano in it, and it had like a spray of flowers on it like you're walking into the Four Seasons. And big, beautiful. The dressing room was probably 4,000 square feet. It was immense. So they're all standing there in front, right in the curve of a grand piano, holding a tube sock. And it says, "Bri, we found your other sock." That was 15 years later, backstage from Bad Company. That's how big the story of the first night
sock.
me and Chuck went to Bubba's Red Dog. And I have that sock. It's autographed by all of them. It's hanging in my office.
And it's funny, I don't remember
That's no
one
little
thing about
feat.
Not when Brian tells a 30-minute story. It went on for 15 years. Stories seem longer than 15 years, but I don't remember a thing except I was in the newspaper on a table or something.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
I'll tell you the funniest thing.
We didn't find you at that point. We hadn't found you.
No.
You weren't part of the story because you weren't home.
I think one of the funniest things I ever heard Harold say was to me, of course. I think it was my 35th birthday. And we were down at the Blue Bar. And you'd come into town. And we're standing there drinking and having shots of tequila and having a great day. And I looked at Harold and I said, "You know what, Harold? When I grow up, I want to be you." And he looked at me without missing a beat and just went, "You can't do both."
Can't do both. How true.
I was like, that's hilarious.
How true.
Man.
I'll tell you one story. When Sammy Kershaw had a big hit on a song called "Queen of My Double Wide,"
Great song.
and Kevin Herron was our Northeast promotion guy at the time, and he was really good. Promotion guys have the toughest job in the record business.
Yeah.
We get to make the records and listen to everything for the first time, and then it's up to the promotion people to get it on the radio where everyone can hear it. So from that standpoint, we got an easy job, and Kevin, he had a real tough job, and we had a big hit on Sammy with this record, except WPOC in Baltimore would not play it. And Kevin went up to talk to the PD and the music director and the program director, and he met with them and said, "No, we can't play anything like that." And he says, "Why not?" And, "Well, we don't have any mobile homes in Baltimore." And he said, "Well, you got an air base, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, you got a mobile home
Somewhere.
Yeah. And he said, "Are you playing?" Alan Jackson had a big hit at the time on a song called Chattahoochee. And he says, "Are you playing Chattahoochee?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, it's a big hit. We're playing that." And he said, "When was the last time the Chattahoochee flowed through Baltimore?"
Yeah.
Was that point taken at that?
Record played.
Yeah.
Record play.
Record play.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Behind the Shed. Behind the Shed podcast was created by Wade Smith, produced by Russ Zavitson and Wade Smith, recorded at Ace Haggerty's podcast house in Nashville, Tennessee. Camera, audio, video, and editing by Zach Day and Jack Youngblood. Music written and composed by Russ Zavitson. Today's guests were Jason Morris, Chuck Bedwell, Brian Rawlings, Russ Zavitson, Wade Smith, and Harold Shedd. You can contact the show via email at behindtheshedd@gmail.com or visit us on Facebook and Instagram. Have a great day and go out and share some stories. Tune in next week as we go Behind the Shed.